So today is definitely one of those days where I was just sitting inside doing nothing, and I started recognizing this weird sort of energy I've been carrying. And lately, as I process things like anger and stress are starting to show up way more frequently in my life than they were generally in the past year. And it used to be one of my biggest struggles. I used to be a very, very big hothead, especially during my teenage years and days of game addiction. And one of the things I had to quickly start noticing, well, not quickly, I had to try and look out for, because it was a very long, drawn out journey, was, do these reactions hold any value? Are they equal to the experience that's causing it? Because quite often, especially if you struggle with anger issues, is you try not to pin it as a point of shame on yourself, but quite often the emotion just doesn't match what triggered it. And quite often it is this sensation of a split second feeling. Well, it could be weeks or days up to that point of unprocessed information, for example. Seems like a random pot up here. Random. I'll go take a gander at that before I keep going. They're so bizarre. Why is there a pot? Someone's doing something. They're flavor. You never know, it goes to show. But yeah, going back to what I was saying is anger and those sort of things used to be the primary point of my life, because I never found it easy enough to create that layer of separation. It was these feelings of instant snap, instant reaction. And oddly enough, I'm not going to say this absolutely shifted everything. And it is a bit of a bizarre way of making my first steps. Was while still living with that addiction, but playing really challenging games and quitting them for many, many months at a time. And I started to realize that, so it's Dark Souls, all those type things. I started to realize that my anger was inhibiting my decisions and my ability to play well. And if I allow the anger to fester, well, success is harder. And this goes in real life. If I feed into it, it can be a source of motivation and energy, but it has, as many people are coming to awareness now, it has some major drawbacks, because you start identifying with a negative emotion as a important factor in your life, rather than realizing it's a sign, but not something that can necessarily fuel you in a more positive manner. And I guess we forget to actually utilize it or repackage it. We, just like I talked about in the last video, we look at it as a bad part of ourselves. We look at it as the worst thing we want to get rid of from our existence. But in truth, it's always there, just like every emotion, and it can always show up. But maybe, it's difficult because for everyone, some things work, others don't. And I don't want to appear like, I have this big grand solution. I don't. No one does. At best, we have solutions and things that seem to generally work. And for me, it was identifying it, trying to separate it mentally, even if that means I still have the agitation, but I consciously take breaks. And that's all it was with games. So eventually I started really reinforcing that the anger isn't really serving me, it's hindering me in terms of processing and things like that. Well, in other aspects, it can be a good way to dump out endorphins and things in your body. Uh, Many will say going out for a run or a skate or a walk will somewhat help shed it. And for me, I tried the gym back in the day. And if anything, for me personally, it made me come back grumpier. The thing that I found generally works was I'd go out into the ocean, go for a dive, and the cold water would kind of shock me back into a more neutral frame of mind. And since I haven't been diving often, the thing that mattered most in that is my environment shifted drastically. I had to slow down, I had to observe. So I still get benefit from being in the water in that way, but quite frankly, it has changed quite a lot. Trying to see if there's any interesting little critters or spiders popping up in here. The thing is, they blend in extremely well. There could be a huntsman or something in here and you'd have basically no way of spotting him, more than likely. And, things that it is more challenging, it's a whole different dynamic, but things that I can somewhat mimic that process on land, going for a walk and trying to observe what I can see. And there's lots and lots of dragonflies. And from what I've read on signs on local swamp walks and bushwalks, is they're actually a sign of a healthy ecosystem. So it's really good to see lots of them around. And there's always so much to learn. And as you learn, you do start to appreciate things differently. But an interesting point I heard not too long ago is on the same topic, just in a different facet to what I sort of consider, is sometimes giving names to things in terms of, the external world can somewhat diminish the interest in it in some ways. Like for a blue devil, one of those gorgeously colorful fish out in the ocean, to actually describe what it looks like, you'd say this fish that looks dark blue, and as light hits it, you find it's covered in these dots that almost reflect almost a neon glow over them. And you can see already the massive difference that is between, oh yeah, it's a blue devil, to this really intricate and colorful fish. It's like kind of a reminder that although, yes, you know some things, but take a second to look further than your immediate first glance, if that makes sense. Animals, plants, flowers, they have all sorts of textures, patterns, colors that you can observe further. And for me, luckily I'm not allergic, but one thing I do like quite a lot is checking out bees. But past few times I've been through here, no luck with them at all. And I really know nothing about plants, to be honest, but I do consider that these may be seed pods of some sort, possibly. And you can walk past, you can glance at it, you can get benefits, but once more, this is a personal thing, but taking in more conscious present moments and identifying things helps quite a lot. And quite frankly, I understand the other side of the coin. Wonder if I can film him. It's very hard to film. This bee is not landed, so I have to kind of try and follow him about. No, off he goes. Fuck, what was I saying? I get distracted frequently as well. I'm gonna have to double check what I just said. One sec. So what I was getting at is I used to live in ways that I would deny things having any positive sort of effect. And mindfulness, it was parroted a lot, but it felt soulless. And it is in a lot of ways that, once more, and I repeat this all the time, it's going to change your world. It's going to be this massive script flipper, where it's not. It's just a tool and an asset. And that was one of the primary things I would live in, is absolute denial that things can work, things can change, that there is something out there that I can find before diving, before skating. And boredom was really the catalyst to making the changes and somewhat being more receptive to testing things out. Just sitting out the backyard bored as shit, or with my diving, sitting at the house bored as fuck, looking at what I could do. And that's another thing, is I'm not saying I can do this. This is not a claim I'm sitting here making. But sometimes we have so much ease of information and access to anything and everything, we forget that we also can have time to think and time to ourselves for our own mind rather than constant stimulation. Hopefully I'm doing it justice. I'm really not used to filming something so skittish. There's a really interesting, colorful dragonfly just over here. And I'm really interested in getting into macro photography, but I need to do so on a budget. And I think GoPro lenses, you may possibly be able to get some for macro. Probably not able to get too close to it. But look at the patterns on the back of it. It's so colorful. Like just then, if I had a really good camera, better than my GoPro, I'd get quite a nice shot of that. And well, it's an excuse to slow down. Everything's an opportunity. And that's kind of the way that would be really good to take that sort of mindset just while existing, not looking for things as a result, but constantly looking at things that are there and we can take in. And another thing is, a lot of, well, almost the way I perceive things rather, is a lot of the world is so based on third-party everything. How are things that I do going to be reflected on others? What am I going to receive for doing X, Y, Z? And it is a very weird dynamic because I'd get out and walk, but because it can be two sides of the coin, I likely wouldn't be talking to anyone, especially with these sort of things. I think I've really got to find a balance because I do find myself, and I'm sure this is an incredibly common experience just in general, and it comes from real lack of, well, not lack of, just not an understanding of what you are and what the world is. And I need to really pay attention and start recognizing that, well, maybe I can live for myself, and these reflections from others have value, but I already have that within myself. And that's something that's incredibly forgotten, that we all hold some sort of value, especially with the way I choose to perceive and the way I look at things like politics and things on that sort of topic is that becomes identity. And now it's always been a thing, rather. Your beliefs, you want to be righteous, so you have to share them, and you have to, not have to, but you do choose to share them. And a lot of ways you see sharing almost seems as a way to signal I'm better, especially when it comes to shutting down people instantly, putting things, all that sort of stuff. And it's really weird how even our belief systems start somewhat shaping off of validation as well. How will this make me look as an individual? So, because I think this way, someone else thinks that I'm above. That's kind of a defeating mindset because, and this doesn't have to be just in politics, this can be in every single facet of life. It doesn't allow for opportunity. It doesn't allow for presence, because that sort of language, when we use that within ourselves, within our own mind, and also onto others, it brings on strong emotional reactions. And emotions are obviously they benefit us in some ways, but also they can be a hindrance till we learn once more the value in them and how to start recognizing ways to be really grounded. Because it's fine to react to things, but if you don't find things to really cement yourself in the world, we can get very, very lost, I still do this once more, and I used to do this heaps, is I would allow certain events or certain things that people would say, I would carry them. They would become my shoes, and I'd walk the rest of the day, the rest of that week, or especially when I struggled, the rest of that month with me. And I would forget that I have my own shoes and my own conscious life, and you start taking it on board, and that thought becomes so cemented in your reality because it triggered you, and maybe rightfully so. But this is one thing I really want to, especially in my own life, recognizes as beyond all of that, there's still agency. And in some ways, we take life away from you and you take it away from others when you start taking on all of this to the point where it comes into your own personal life. And it's not saying that you can't relate to others. It's not saying you can't share your beliefs. It's not saying that you can't communicate. But it's more so trying to be a bit more responsible and allowing for space for you as an individual and space to, or creating the environment for yourself to have the opportunity to grow. Because generally speaking, growth comes from environment in your mind in the world, who you surround yourself with, and your actions. Actually living in those sort of means is firstly getting out and just observing and appreciating and trying to constantly recognize the value that is out there rather than, oh, everything's shit. I'm a shit person. I've done shit things in the past. I've behaved poorly. I did all this. There's no room. And in some ways, you even start taking away room from yourself because you start living in that rather than living with your own opportunities and own reflections. There's many good things we all want to do, and there may be barriers to them. But this is an analogy I thought of not too long ago. A lot of the stuff is fairly recent. Is we focus on the gate, which is the big problem that's stopping us and providing a hindrance. But to that gate, there's brambles. There's other emotions. There's anger, there's anxiety, there's stress, there's guilt, there's all of that. Getting to the main thing that you would like to focus or grow on, sometimes, while it's true you can grow into it, the brambles will make it harder to access that gate. And as, in a weird way, as we do other sorts of things, well, the gate does become more accessible, With my anger, as I got out more in the world and I got on my skateboard after my gaming addiction, as I shifted my music, then anger started to become even more accessible. That if I wanted to address anger, you would think that you go to therapy, like in the traditional sense, before you've really had big conversations, is you go to therapy, you talk, you do X, gates open, anger gone. But there's so many facets in all of our emotions that quite often it's things, layers underneath. And it may even feel like these layers underneath aren't going to shift things. But with time, you do find that as weird as it is, working through the secondary emotions can make that main problem a little bit easier. And I really need to, part of judgment is anxiety and also guilt, especially when we reflect that within ourselves. That can be present when we use that lens and we judge other people. It's not to say everyone is an absolute angel, It's not to say no one can do wrong, but if that's the way we look at things, if that's the way we look at them with all this negative loading, we forget there's a human underneath. And, let's say someone or something is the absolute worst. Well, thinking, presenting, and saying that you're the worst in every facet isn't going to give this person that you're so against any footing to grow. And it's so hard because once more, these footings are so cemented for some people, like myself, that, I'm generally open to a lot of personalities. I am very shy. I'm very introverted. But there are things that I'm still very not receptive to and things that I struggle to overlook. Well, not overlook, that's the wrong word, but to look underneath, Once more, if you call someone an idiot and you use loaded language, well, are they likely going to be receptive in the first place? If you use another word that has a lot of loaded language in our mind and we point it to someone, we're in our own conscious thoughts, we're not going to be as receptive to that person. If you consciously try and think of someone as evil all the time, no matter what they will be, even if they begin to grow past it, once you carry that perception, they are what you label them as, and that is setting them in shoes of concrete. And that's one of my struggles with certain challenging people in my past and present, is part of the way to move past that is, even if they don't necessarily outgrow things, at least in our own minds, we try and weaken that concrete load. And even if we don't connect with them anymore, even if they're just a thought, well, once you remove that loading, you can start to remove the negative things that you live in as reminders, because that was an absolute major, that was huge in my life. I used to always live in reflections of people in my history. That's what I was. And I would have these visceral reactions to other people that would also remind me of those sort of aspects of the people in my history. And I lived, after many years of complete disconnection, still with that in me. All those people are bad. This person was this person was that. But they're removed. I do not interact with them. I do not engage with them. They no longer hold any value. I'm completely separated. But I still carry those emotions, which is a really weird thing to consider, that something that's 100% disconnected from your life can be almost conjoined with yourself if you don't try and work to freeing those weights. Yeah, my journey's fucking over a decade. It's still ongoing. For everyone, it still is. So hopefully hopefully there's value for other people in these as well, as much as it is for myself to reflect out loud. Some people would just journal. Some people would do voice memos and never put it up. For me, I'm pretty much using these as a self-journal. And whatever format works for you. But it is a good thing. You just got to find what's generally perceived as an effective manner. Maybe you use a little inkling of what that actually is, and you do that in a different dynamic, and you may find that it works for you. Rather than concrete, I'll follow this, do this, it'll work. Sometimes it's just taking a facet of what's being said and trying to implement it in a completely different platform, you know? For example, mindfulness, you're surfing, you have to concentrate loss. Mindfulness, diving, mindfulness, this. It doesn't have to be sit in a room, cross your legs, look at the wall, identify colors, feel textures. It doesn't have to be this concrete format. And I don't think it was ever intended to be that way. But what's really weird is it seems like it. So just remember, take the core aspects, give it a crack in many different ways, and take as much time as you need, because eventually something will stick.